Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. Our guest today is Jane Stein. Let's talk about franchises. Welcome to the show, Jane.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Alicia.
Let's start by talking a bit about your business. Everybody knows what a franchise is, but I don't think everybody understands it from that more business-minded perspective. So I'm looking forward to hearing this, because I think we might actually maybe set off a few light bulbs for people who have not previously considered how franchising can actually fit into their business, their wealth, their future. So let's give them a little bit of an education, Jane.
Great. Love to. Yeah, I always laugh about people think franchising is McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. And so I like to open people's minds to the fact that it's not your father's franchise world anymore. And there are so many crazy concepts out there that are franchises. And in fact, I'm going to read a couple just because this will just blow your mind. So, number one, you can invest in a franchise just to be a franchise broker, which is what I do. You can invest in a franchise that focuses on nothing but enhancing school fundraisers. You know how if you've ever had your kid in sports and they send home those awful coupon books they have to sell door to door, and you're like, let me just buy them all. This is awful. And they've like completely modernized that whole process and can quadruple what a high school has been raising for the baseball team in a short period of time. There's franchises too for crime cleanup. That's all they do. Not for everyone.
Not for everybody. I've heard some pretty horrific stories about that just recently, in fact.
Oh, geez. There's wineries, there's cryotherapy, there's estate sales, which is huge business as it turns out. If you have a good estate sale, 500 people line up on a Friday morning at 7 a.m. to get first dibs, and you can make $15,000 in a weekend hosting an estate sale. Escape rooms, dog training, of course, vending of those boxes that are in all the gas stations where you dump your textiles. Most of those are franchises. Erotica stores, of course. Social cannabis consumption lounges are big right now. Unusual and patented ways for commercial business owners to condense their trash. That has become huge. Better for the environment, saves a ton of money. Have you ever been in a town where they're peddling and cocktailing down the road? That's a franchise. Drug labs, drug testing labs, big business. Anyway, and everything else. So just so many crazy, there's 3,000 franchises at any given moment. And with
I think this is fascinating because we don't know that most of these things, we might not even know that some of these things exist, but certainly certain business models more than others really are up and coming. And like you mentioned, certain businesses really are like the hot thing to get into. And a lot of them do have staying power. So then it makes sense that it can be a pretty savvy business plan for someone who perhaps doesn't want to build a business from scratch. We talked a little bit, just real briefly before we started recording, that even a franchise is going to require work, even though there's a lot that is already laid out for you, kind of a done for you business model. Business is not easy. It's not just, hang up your shingle and people just rush to, start throwing their credit card at you.
Unless it's Chick-fil-A,
Unless
which you
it's Chick-fil-A. But, to be fair, they've done a lot of work to get to where they are, and they really have some incredibly efficient systems that make the whole experience much more positive for the consumer. So kudos to them. And that does require work, and they've really nailed it, in my opinion. My family loves Chick-fil-A.
Who doesn't?
So then when people are coming to you, a franchise broker, what's going on with them? Do they typically know what type of business they're looking to get into? Do they just say, okay, here's how much money I have, what fits for me? What does that process look like?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. This isn't necessarily relevant for business owners, so we're going to quickly pivot to that, but I'll give you a quick down and dirty on that. People come to me in both scenarios. Sometimes they know they want a restaurant. Sometimes they know they want something in fitness or wellness. Sometimes they actually have a specific franchise and they're wanting help because nobody at the brand is returning their phone calls or emails. But generally speaking, I'm referred to somebody who is in some sort of reinvention. The typical profile is they're in their 40s or 50s, occasionally 60s, occasionally 30s, and something isn't working in their life right now. Either they're completely burned out on working so hard for somebody else's bottom line, or they have been laid off and they know they can't get back into the job market at that same $250,000 a year or $300,000 a year they're used to making, because maybe there's an ageism issue, which there definitely is in this country, or a variety of other reasons. Sometimes it's a father wanting to invest in a business for their son or daughter. Sometimes it's a husband and wife and they're retired, but they really have always wanted to do something fun together. So many scenarios. That's what makes it really fun. In a perfect world, I try to educate them or encourage them, not educate, I try to encourage them to have no preconceptions about what kind of business they want yet. Let's do some profiling. Let's do a psychometric assessment. Let's have them fill out a lengthy questionnaire about their strengths and weaknesses and what they like to do and what kind of people they like to interface with and what sort of lifestyle objective they have. And that's not just money, it's hours. How many hours do they have, available? Because sometimes people don't leave the job. They just are looking for a side hustle, or they're looking for a semi-absentee business that they can build up to the point where they could leave their paying job. So all those scenarios. And then what I do is I go through a series of conversations. We talk through the pluses and minuses of various industry categories based on what they've told me and their strengths and their not so strengths, and the pluses and minuses of each, and the brick and mortar versus home-based, blah, 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 scalability, recurring revenue, whatever it is. There's 25 or 40 probably business attributes that we're going to talk about. We're going to prioritize the ones that are most important for the person. And then I'm going to do some demographic work. I'm going to see what's in their market, what's not, because I work nationwide. And of course, finances are part of that. Right now, interest rates are horrible. It's a very bad time to be trying to tap an SBA loan. So we'll talk through all of that. We'll come up with a budget. At the end of the day, I'm going to do territory checks on their behalf with probably 50 brands. I work with over 800 brands in my database, so I know how to reach everybody at a high level. I'm going to get those territory checks back. Then I'm going to do a deeper dive and eliminate and essentially show that candidate 6 or 7 different business models that are available, that hit on as many of those burners as I can get, much like a realtor, by the way. Instead of looking at houses, I'm going to present to you 6 to 8 business models that are in the budget that I think would work in your market. And in fact, there's a need for them in your market. And then, and only then, will I be introducing you to the franchisor at a very high level, to the ones that you want to research first. My hard work is done at that point, but I am going to be coaching you through the process. I'm sort of the go-between. If you're not hearing something you don't like or you want out, I reach back to the franchisor and say, thank you for your time, we're moving on, whatever. Or if there's a question that I think needs to be answered, I'll reach out and say, hey, be sure you answer this question. They don't feel like they really understood it on your last call. Yeah, and that's it. And ultimately, I'm compensated by the franchise. So it's a very good value add for the client. It's not like real estate, for example, where potentially a buyer could reach out directly and try and save a little commission for the seller and drop the price a little bit. None of that happens in my industry. It's regulated. The franchise fee is the franchise fee. It's basically set in stone unless you're doing multi-units. We're regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. It's not like you could go direct and save any money. So there's actually no reason not to use, an advisor. We're theoretically, and I know it's true in my case, an independent and neutral third party. I will be the first to tell my candidate, I don't like what you're hearing. Let's pass on this one, So, because I know the red flags and
So
they
you're
may not.
kind of like the fiduciary.
You could say so, but I'm not legally a fiduciary.
Not legally, but you act in a lot of that same capacity where you're just being that more honest, objective sounding board and coming in to this with your areas of expertise. I think it sounds fantastic. I mean, how many business owners listening to this are thinking to themselves, man, if I would have done that much due diligence before I started this business, I might have actually done things differently. I might have, started a different business, or I might have taken a different approach with this business, or whatever that case may be. Even though a lot of our listeners are in established businesses and perhaps they're not considering exiting their business, maybe they are. Mm-hmm. Burnout is a real thing. And for serial entrepreneurs, especially, I get it, right? That's my problem too. There's a passion for doing different things. You don't want just one thing. You love to be creating different things, and you love to be, for some people, it is more about wealth creation. For some people, they're just passionate about it. If my husband could start every business that he had ever conjured up in his mind, it would be absolutely ridiculous. Like he's an ideas guy, right? And some people just want to have that kind of diversity in their life and in their business portfolio. So there's a lot of value in this conversation for our listeners coming at it from different perspectives. But I want to talk a little bit about something that you and I had briefly touched on earlier, which is, what about those business owners that do have a thriving business and they're contemplating, is my business franchisable?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, and I periodically get those calls. There's organizations, companies that specialize in helping you bring your business to the franchise world. Some are bare bones strategists. They just help you get your disclosure documents done and they give you a little bit of advice and that's it. And others that take on the full blown, maybe even with equity, soup to nuts. We start with the legal part. You got to have your franchise disclosure document drafted, which is awful, but that's the hard part. You need a lawyer. Then you need all the marketing collateral. And then you need somebody to push that concept out, whether it's through the broker community or organically. And usually it's a combination of both. And it's an expensive proposition. And very often the founder of the business who's passionate and loves it is not necessarily the best salesperson to be selling the franchises to that business. Sometimes they are. But yeah, so I would say, and because I didn't know with this conversation was going to go there, there's more to this, but for sure, what is important are a couple of things. One is branding. If you start a business and know that ultimately you want to franchise it, it has to have very slick branding. The collateral, the logos, the colors, the way the business looks. The operations manual has to be tight, tight, tight. Start there because that'll help you whether you franchise or not, right? Things have to be e-mythed. If you've read that book, Michael Gerber, you have to have everything executable and replicatable. So stop doing everything yourself, train people to do it, and get those systems down in a document and make it easy and as replicatable as possible so that ideally a trained robot could do whatever that task is. Certainly not human to human functions, which are sales people and marketing people and customer service people. And proof of concept needs to be there. I talk to a lot of owners who feel like they want to franchise their business. And the first question I ask, and I say, I apologize for this in advance, but are you taking out over 100,000 net from the business every year? And if the answer is no, forget about it. Nobody wants to buy that. Nobody really wants to buy a job where they can work their butt off and make $75,000 a year. You need to show 3 years or more, and you will be required to show this, of your P&L documenting net EBITDA of well over 100,000. And then the final piece is if you really want to have a successful franchise, make it something that an owner could come in and invest in and run semi-absentee. And that means he could put a manager in place, he can supervise, he can keep his day job and supervise what's happening and run this business and still make that figure that I referred to. So that's a slam dunk. Not all businesses are meant to be semi-absentee. Most businesses are made to be either owner operator or an executive model. An executive model means you're running it. You're not necessarily in the field doing the work, but you're in there putting in, your daily supervision. And that's fine. It can be a business like that too. And those would be service-based businesses typically. So I would say it has to be replicatable, have to have your operations manual tight, has to be profitable, and has to show profitability for at least 3 years.
Let's pivot just a little bit and talk about some of the pros and cons to getting into this whole franchise business. I'm sure there, just like everything, there are some really great pros and there are some cons that need serious consideration. Since you've been doing this and you're in it, you're the perfect person to ask. Can you share with us some of those things that someone who's maybe giving this some serious thought should take into consideration?
Sure. Well, the pros are pretty much 1 and 2. 1, scalability, because not everybody has the capital and or wherewithal to expand nationwide, but they have the desire to build an empire. And they want to see their product or service in every city in the country. That's their goal. So scalability is the benefit. And let's face it, maybe you'll be the one, the 10% that really, really, really make it. And that's incredible. But sometimes the goal isn't that grand. I mean, lots of franchises start and they say, you know what, I just want to dominate this region. We just want to expand throughout the Southeast region. Great. And they're happy with their 50 franchisees. That can be a very successful little business. And it's also, in terms of building wealth, private equity is in this business big, and they are actively scouring, looking for new franchises that look like they're going to hit it. And that becomes attracted to them when there's over 50 locations open and operating, and especially when there's over 100 locations open and operating. So you can literally, hit it so big if you happen to be lucky enough to get to that 50 to 100 locations open and operating, and private equity comes along. That also brings up downsides. So downside is, number one, it's going to be very expensive to launch. I've heard varying numbers. I've heard professionals say, honestly, you should not consider this without $500,000 that you can put into it. At a bare minimum, I would say $100,000. And so the expense is the downside. And there's absolutely no guarantee you're ever going to sell more than 2 franchises. Happens all the time, especially because you don't have the capital to hire the big boys to sell your franchise. And I don't mean me, I mean talking about these organizations that take on the whole marketing aspect. So if you're trying to do it yourself on a shoestring, it's never going to happen, honestly, unless you get so lucky. So cost, risk of not happening is very high. And the number one thing that's probably very, very hard for somebody who's built a business and it's their baby and it's their passion is loss of control. You can't tell your franchisees what to do. You can show them your systems. You can build into your agreement reasons that you can pull back the franchise if they're violating certain parameters of your operations manual, but you will absolutely lose control, and you will have people out there that are not doing it as well as you, and it's your name on the business. It's your brand. So it's that piece, I think, that freaks people out more than anything else, and it's valid. If you have 100 franchises sold at any given time, guess what? 10 of those are going to be underperforming, and they're not going to be very happy with you. And maybe that number is more like 20. And they're not executing well. They have poor reviews. I mean, you're doing all you can to support them. And some people should have never bought in the first place. Maybe you didn't do a great job of screening. Maybe your marketing team, who was responsible for placements, didn't do a great job of screening. It happens. And I would say the first 10 franchises that you sell are the most important. Those 10 have to succeed, because if they do not love you and if they are not successful, you will never sell the next 40. Because in our business, there's something called validation. You are required by the Federal Trade Commission as part of the sales process to disclose the name and contact information of every franchisee in your system. And you will not be on the phone when the prospective buyer says, "Hi, Bob, how's it going? I'm thinking about buying." And believe me, they let it all hang out.
This is
interesting.
It is interesting, and it makes a lot of sense when you really dig into it. Everything that you're saying is incredibly logical. Now, for those listening who are like, okay, well, my business is not franchisable. In fact, I want to retire from my business, or I would like to open a franchise that's complementary to my area of expertise. How can our listeners begin that process? Maybe this is a great time, since we're getting towards the end of our episode, for you to share with our listeners how they can connect with you and begin this exploratory process.
Sure. I've helped many, many business owners, scale by adding different lines of revenue. in the franchise space that are very complementary, maybe even with the same employees, certainly the same customer base, and you already have those deep relationships. So there's many, many examples of that. Or sometimes it's a question of them just selling the business and saying, this time I want to invest in a franchise because A, I don't have the big idea. B, I want it to be simple. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I want something simple. Give me the plan. I want to execute. I have another business in me, but I don't have the energy and wherewithal to develop another business myself. And because you've been a business owner, you know what to look for, right? In terms of what it needs to have to be a good fit for you. Anyway, a good way to reach me, I guess, is LinkedIn. You can literally Google Front Range Franchise Broker, and I show up. I'll tell you the name of my business. It's called Your Franchise is Waiting. And if you put that in any search engine, you're going to get to all of my social media, my LinkedIn and everything else. But again, that's the name of my business. It's the name of my website. I also have branded the Girlfriend's Guide to Franchising. So if you'd like to try and remember that, because it's easier to remember, the Girlfriend's Guide to Franchising, that'll take you to my website and my LinkedIn and all of my social as well. Jane Stein.
Perfect. This has been a fun conversation, a little different than anything we've had on the show before, which is always great because we're giving some new fresh ideas, some new fresh perspective on something that we haven't talked about, a million times, like SEO and stuff. No offense to my SEO guests. Right. I love you all, right?
Right.
But this is a very, very really a cool conversation to have because now we're opening up to maybe some other possibilities that some of our listeners perhaps haven't previously considered before. And as business owners, it in large part, it's in our DNA. We're just addicted to it. But I've got a dear friend and client who is really considering, exiting a business that he built from scratch. It's a multi-million-dollar business. He's, getting to that place where it's like, okay, it's time for me to step out of the role of CEO. It's time for me to start thinking about what am I going to do after that? And it's like, I don't know what to do after that. Can't do nothing. Can't. Right. And
you could do nothing for a while.
Some people say that they're able to do nothing for a while. Some people are like, yep, it was about 24, maybe 48 hours tops. This is a great option for a lot of individuals like that. They've got the cash.
Yep.
They've got the drive. They've got the experience. They've got the burning desire. They just don't want to have to build something all the way from scratch, from the ground up, and to say, here are some proven businesses that still are going to require a little bit of sweat equity. Maybe you get, get in there and you get, roll up your sleeves and get your hands a little bit dirty, but it's a very different type of business building experience to take something that already has, you've got all your processes, you've got all of your systems already devised and proven, and now it's just a matter of implementing.
And don't forget, it is an area that allows you to completely reinvent in a different category of business. They don't want experts. If you've been in IT, if his business has been computers, they don't want you in an IT franchise. You get to start fresh. You could own a pet franchise. You could own a preschool. You get to follow your passion and do something fun for a change.
Yeah, true. It's true. And a lot of times people do want the change. That's why you hear all these stories about people who are like, yeah, I exited my my whatever business, my manufacturing company, and then I went over here and got into like this completely other, because we're humans.
Became a yoga instructor or something.
Yeah, exactly. Switch it up, right? You don't have to be the same your whole life. In fact, that gets kind of dull. So This has been a lot of fun, Jane. I want to thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Alicia.
And of course, got to thank all of our listeners. You know we're doing this for you. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.